I really just have one fundamental complaint, one Mount Everest size issue that I just can't get past when it comes to popular level Calvinism. And I don't understand why people don't focus on this a little bit more or a lot more. And it's simply this: when you look at the uh, fundamental beliefs that drive popular level Calvinism, which of course are the conclusions of the Synod of TULIP, um, total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints. Even if you take one out or modify one or more of those, the vision of God that it creates just does not look anything like Jesus. I don't understand why this isn't a problem for people who call themselves Calvinists. The vision of God that it actually creates, or at least corresponds to perfectly, is the vision of God that theologians understand or call classical theism. It creates a God that cannot be influenced by anything outside of himself, has no human-like emotions, exists outside of time, and simply dictates every little event that happens. There may be some people who call themselves Calvinists who say, I don't adhere to that vision of God. Well, I would say, well, you haven't done your study, because that's just simply what Reformed thinking um, promotes, believes. I mean, throughout all of history, and even Calvin himself, his predecessors, and all of the thinking people who came after him, the Princetonians, Charles Hodge, Warfield, earlier theologians, Francis Turretin, they all believe this vision of God, where God is impassible, immutable, simple, and all of these attributes. Actually, you can find them in the thinkings of the ancient Greek philosophers, etc. But this vision of God as a dictator who simply wills things before the foundation of the world then becomes the center of the popular level Calvinists' worldview, and then you try to understand and make sense of your universe from that perspective. And that God just doesn't look anything at all like Jesus Christ. And one of the main messages of the New Testament is that Jesus Christ is supposed to be our paradigm. He's the one. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Set your eyes in the heavenly places where Christ is seated at the right hand of God, in Colossians 3. And that other one I quoted was Hebrews 12. Jesus is supposed to be our vision of God. And classical theism cannot be reconciled to the man of Galilee, who walked around, interacted, felt human-like emotions, responded, would even change his mind because of the persistence of the people who were approaching him. There were things he clearly did not like disease and even inclement weather that would threaten people, hunger. He didn't like those things. He certainly didn't cause those things. He didn't like them. He'd fight against them. People in mental duress, oppression. He didn't like these things. He didn't cause these things. And there's nothing in the Gospels that would ever indicate he caused them. And he really kind of went to war against them. And this vision of Jesus, the Gospel of John drives this home so clearly in the prologue of John. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God, who's in the bosom of the Father, who is, of course, Jesus. He explained him. The apostles wanted some other vision of God in John 14. And he said, have I been so long with you, and you haven't come to know me? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Hebrews chapter 1 says he's the radiance of his glory, the exact representation of his nature. 1 Corinthians tells us that the glory of God is seen in the face of Christ, and that Jesus Christ is the image of God. He's supposed to be our focal point, the God created by the central tenets of Calvinism is the God of classical theism, and that vision of God doesn't look anything like Jesus. Jesus Christ is supposed to be our vision of God. He's supposed to be the center of our worldview. He's supposed to be the one that we figure out all of our theological questions. He's the center point. He's the point of reference. So we figure out prayer by looking at Jesus. We figure out holiness by looking at Jesus. We figure out what it means to be made in the image of God by looking at Jesus. So this is my complaint. There is no systematic theology written by a reformed thinker that even attempts, that I'm aware of, and I've got 3 theological degrees, even attempts to reconcile this idea that a man is explaining God to us in any meaningful way, because the ontology or the type of being that the God of classical theism is 100% completely incompatible with a human ontology. So then we end up having to throw out all these statements in the New Testament because they're nonsensical. A man cannot explain the God that is right smack at the center of historic Calvinistic thought, at least post-Reformation dogmatics and on down to today. It's the God of classical theism. He doesn't look like Jesus, and when you put him at the center, everything turns to a muddle. So you're wondering, why should I do evangelism if God is just causing things? How can you imitate that God? You can't, even though Ephesians says, as beloved children, be imitators of God. So this is my fundamental complaint. Could anybody please give me an answer? No, they can't, because if it could have been done, someone like Francis Turretin or someone with a much greater mind than even theologians, we don't even have the capacity that they used to have because they would start them much younger as children. Someone like Jonathan Edwards but somebody would have solved that problem. It can't be solved because a human ontology, the human type of a being, has nothing in common with the classical theistic vision of God type of a being. So a human cannot explain that type of a being. This is my complaint, and I hope people understand it, 'cause it's a pretty big deal. What it means is that Jesus Christ cannot explain the invisible God. He didn't just do it by his life, but when he was asked to tell us what God was like, he painted a picture of a caring, responsive person, like his teachings on prayer. In Matthew chapter 7, he uses a kind, compassionate father, a character portrait very much like he was living out before our eyes. That is supposed to be the center of our theology, not some abstruse philosophical stack of attributes that have nothing to do with what a human person looks like or how they engage the universe. I don't understand why people don't see this as a problem, but this is the argument isn't primarily how many great thinkers had this view, or let's do a Bible study through Ephesians 1 and Romans 9, and I can prove to you that this view is true. The biggest problem is that Jesus cannot be the representative of who and what God is in the Calvinistic system.